4 years ago, 15-year-old Jamal Carter walked into Benjamin Franklin High School in Baltimore, Maryland, on what seemed like an ordinary Tuesday afternoon in October 2001. He attended his morning classes, ate lunch with friends, and was last seen entering his sixth period chemistry class. When the final bell rang at 3:15 p.m., Jamal Carter had vanished without a trace from inside the school building itself. Before we continue, subscribe and hit that notification bell. Here we reopen cold cases with respect and evidence. The disappearance of Jamal Carter sent shockwaves through Baltimore's tight-knit community and plunged his family into an abyss of despair that would consume them for years. His mother, Patricia Carter, a single parent working 2 jobs to support her 3 children, had built her life around ensuring Jamal had opportunities she never had. The honor roll student with dreams of becoming an engineer represented hope in a neighborhood where hope was often in short supply. Within hours of Jamal's disappearance, Benjamin Franklin High School became a crime scene. Police officers flooded the hallways, questioning students, teachers, and staff. K-9 units searched every classroom, locker, basement storage room, and ventilation shaft. The Baltimore Police Department deployed every available resource, treating the case with the urgency it deserved. Initially, Detective Marcus Williams, a 20-year veteran of the force, led the investigation. He interviewed over 200 students and 40 faculty members in the first week alone. The search expanded beyond the school grounds to nearby parks, abandoned buildings, and the Patapsco River. Volunteers from the community joined search parties that combed through West Baltimore for weeks, following every possible lead. But as days turned to weeks and weeks turned to months, the intensive search began to slow. The media coverage that initially spotlighted Jamal's case gradually shifted to other stories. The Baltimore Police Department, overwhelmed with rising crime rates and limited resources, allocated fewer officers to what was becoming a cold case. Detective Williams, despite his dedication, was reassigned to active homicide cases that demanded immediate attention. Patricia Carter watched helplessly as her son's disappearance transformed from breaking news to a forgotten tragedy. She plastered missing person flyers on every telephone pole, bus stop, and store window in a 10-mile radius. She organized candlelight vigils that drew dozens of community members in the beginning, but eventually dwindled to just family and a few close friends. The school district, concerned about liability and negative publicity, implemented new security measures, but offered little in the way of answers. The impact on the Carter family was devastating. Jamal's younger sister, Keisha, just 12 years old when her brother disappeared, began having nightmares and withdrew from friends and activities. His older brother, Marcus, 18 and college-bound, deferred his acceptance to stay home and help search for Jamal. Patricia Carter lost 30 pounds in the first 3 months, barely sleeping or eating, consumed by the haunting question of how a teenager could simply vanish from a building filled with hundreds of people. The school community was equally shaken. Students reported feeling unsafe, parents demanded answers, and teachers struggled to maintain normalcy in classrooms haunted by Jamal's empty desk. Principal Robert Harrison held multiple town hall meetings, but could offer little beyond platitudes about cooperation with police and enhanced security measures. As the first anniversary of Jamal's disappearance approached, the case had grown cold. The Baltimore Police Department had no active leads, no suspects, and no evidence of what happened to the promising young man who had simply walked into school one day and never walked out. The official file remained open, but in practical terms, the investigation had stalled. Patricia Carter refused to accept defeat. She hired a private investigator with money she couldn't afford, started a website dedicated to finding her son, and contacted every media outlet that would listen. But Baltimore in 2002 was grappling with one of its most violent years on record. and the disappearance of one teenager, however tragic, couldn't compete for attention with the daily drumbeat of homicides and drug-related violence. The school tried to return to normal, but Jamal's absence remained a ghost in the hallways. His locker was cleaned out and reassigned. His name was quietly removed from the honor roll board. The chemistry class, where he was last seen, continued without him, but his teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, would later say she could never look at his empty seat without wondering what happened to the bright, eager student who asked thoughtful questions and dreamed of building bridges. By 2005, 4 years after Jamal Carter walked into Benjamin Franklin High School and never came home, his case had joined the thousands of missing person files that gathered dust in police departments across America. The vigils had stopped. The media had moved on. Even some family friends had begun to whisper that maybe it was time to accept that Jamal wasn't coming home. But Patricia Carter never stopped believing her son was out there somewhere, waiting to be found. The years following Jamal Carter's disappearance transformed Benjamin Franklin High School into a place haunted by unspoken questions and collective guilt. Students who had been freshmen when Jamal vanished graduated and moved on with their lives, but those who remained carried the weight of that October afternoon like a scar that never fully healed. Mrs. Elena Rodriguez, Jamal's chemistry teacher, struggled with survivor's guilt that consumed her professional life. She had taken attendance at the beginning of 6th period. Jamal was present. When she turned to write equations on the blackboard, he was sitting in the 3rd row, notebook open, pencil ready. But when she turned back to the class 20 minutes later, his seat was empty. She assumed he had gone to the restroom and would return before the period ended. He never did. "I replay that moment every single day," Mrs. Rodriguez would later tell investigators. "If I had noticed immediately, if I had asked where he went, if I had called the office, maybe everything would be different." The guilt ate away at her dedication to teaching, and she took early retirement in 2003, unable to stand in front of another classroom without seeing Jamal's empty chair. The school's administrative response in the aftermath revealed troubling gaps in their security protocols and crisis management. Principal Robert Harrison faced intense scrutiny from parents, the school board and media outlets, demanding explanations for how a student could disappear from a supervised classroom without anyone noticing until hours later. The school's initial story, that Jamal had simply left campus, perhaps to skip his remaining classes, quickly fell apart when investigators determined he had no history of truancy and his personal belongings, including his backpack and winter coat, remained in his locker. Security footage from that day became a source of frustration rather than answers. The school's camera system was outdated and poorly maintained, with several cameras not functioning at all. The cameras that did work had significant blind spots throughout the building, including the hallway outside Mrs. Rodriguez's chemistry classroom. Investigators could track Jamal entering the school that morning, but the last verified image showed him walking toward his 6th period class at 2:55 p.m. Detective Marcus Williams spent countless hours analyzing the timeline of that afternoon, interviewing and re-interviewing everyone who might have seen Jamal. The investigation revealed a disturbing pattern of inconsistencies and evasive responses from school staff. Some teachers claimed to have seen Jamal in the hallways during 6th period, but their timelines didn't match. Others insisted they never saw him that day, despite evidence suggesting otherwise. The janitor, Robert Bobby Thompson, a 45-year-old man who had worked at the school for 8 years, provided conflicting statements about his whereabouts during the time of Jamal's disappearance. Initially, he claimed to have been cleaning restrooms on the 2nd floor, but later changed his story, saying he was in the basement storage areas, organizing supplies. When pressed about the discrepancy, Thompson became defensive and claimed he couldn't remember exact details from a day that seemed ordinary at the time. More troubling was the discovery that the school had failed to follow its own protocols for reporting missing students. According to district policy, any student absence from class should have triggered an immediate call to parents and an administrative check. Mrs. Rodriguez didn't report Jamal's absence until after the final bell, and the main office didn't contact Patricia Carter until nearly 5 p.m., almost 2 hours after school ended. This delay potentially compromised crucial evidence and search efforts during the critical first hours of Jamal's disappearance. The Baltimore Police Department's investigation also faced internal challenges that hindered progress. Detective Williams discovered that evidence from the school had been improperly catalogued and stored. Fingerprints collected from Jamal's locker and desk were contaminated by subsequent handling. Security tapes from surrounding businesses that might have captured Jamal leaving the school grounds were not collected until days later, and by then, several had been recorded over or discarded. Community members began to whisper about potential cover-ups and institutional failures. Parents organized protests outside the school board offices, demanding accountability and answers. The NAACP chapter in Baltimore issued statements questioning whether the investigation would have been more thorough and urgent if the missing student had been white. These tensions reflected deeper issues of trust between Baltimore's African-American community and both the police department and school system. Patricia Carter found herself fighting battles on multiple fronts. While desperately searching for her son, she also had to navigate a bureaucratic maze of officials who seemed more concerned with protecting their institutions than finding answers. School administrators limited her access to campus and staff. Police detectives, while sympathetic, provided few updates and seemed to be making little progress. Media coverage, initially supportive, began to focus more on systemic failures than on Jamal himself. The psychological toll on the Carter family deepened as the second year without Jamal began. Keisha, now 14, was struggling in school and had begun seeing a counselor for anxiety and depression. Marcus had deferred college for a second time, unable to move forward with his life while his brother's fate remained unknown. Patricia, despite working multiple jobs, was drowning in debt from private investigation costs and the financial strain of constantly searching for her son. As 2003 turned to 2004 and then to 2005, the case grew colder. New students arrived at Benjamin Franklin High School with no knowledge of Jamal Carter. New teachers were hired who never knew about the boy who disappeared from chemistry class. The hallways were repainted, security cameras were upgraded, and policies were revised. But the fundamental questions remained unanswered. How does a 15-year-old honor student vanish from inside a school building? Where did Jamal Carter go? And why was everyone who might know something staying so quiet? By 2005, 4 years after Jamal Carter's disappearance, Benjamin Franklin High School had undergone significant changes in its security infrastructure and administrative policies. The tragedy had forced the Baltimore School District to confront uncomfortable truths about campus safety and student supervision. However, these improvements came too late for the Carter family, and some community members suspected they were designed more to prevent legal liability than to address the deeper questions surrounding Jamal's vanishing. The school installed a comprehensive digital security system with 32 high-definition cameras covering every hallway, entrance, and common area. Metal detectors were added at the main entrances, and all visitors were required to check in with photo identification. A new electronic badge system tracked student movement throughout the day, and teachers were required to report any absence within 15 minutes of the start of each period. These measures, while effective for preventing future incidents, served as daily reminders of the boy who had slipped through the cracks of the previous system. Marcus Williams, the detective who had led the initial investigation, was promoted to sergeant in 2004, but never stopped thinking about the Jamal Carter case. He kept the file on his desk and continued following up on tips and leads during his off hours. Williams had investigated dozens of missing person cases throughout his career, but something about Jamal's disappearance haunted him. The complete absence of evidence, the conflicting witness statements, and the institutional resistance he encountered during the investigation convinced him that someone at the school knew more than they were telling. During this period, Williams began conducting informal interviews with former students and staff members who had left Benjamin Franklin High School since 2001. Many were more willing to speak candidly once they were no longer associated with the institution. These conversations revealed a troubling pattern of inappropriate behavior and boundary violations by certain staff members that had been reported but inadequately addressed by the administration. Several former students described feeling uncomfortable around the janitor, Bobby Thompson, who was known for engaging students in lengthy conversations and asking personal questions about their home lives and after-school activities. Thompson, who had access to every area of the school building, including classrooms during instruction time, had been the subject of at least 3 formal complaints from students who felt he was overly familiar and intrusive. These complaints had been filed with the principal's office, but resulted in nothing more than informal counseling sessions. More disturbing was the discovery that Thompson had previously worked at 2 other Baltimore area schools before being hired at Benjamin Franklin High School. Williams learned that Thompson had left his previous positions under circumstances that were never fully explained. When he attempted to access Thompson's employment records and background check information, he encountered bureaucratic roadblocks and was told that personnel files from that period had been destroyed as part of routine record retention policies. Williams also uncovered evidence of a culture of silence and self-protection within the school that may have hampered the initial investigation. Several teachers admitted that they had been instructed by administrators to limit their cooperation with police to avoid negative publicity for the school. Some faculty members revealed that they had information or observations about the day Jamal disappeared that they had never shared with investigators because they feared it might implicate colleagues or reflect poorly on their own professional conduct. The community surrounding Benjamin Franklin High School had also changed in the years since Jamal's disappearance. Rising property values and urban development had displaced many long-time residents, including families who might have had knowledge about the case. The corner store where Jamal sometimes bought snacks after school was demolished and replaced by a chain pharmacy. The park where he played basketball with friends became a parking lot for a new apartment complex. These changes weren't just physical. They represented the gradual erasure of the social networks and community memory that might have held clues to what happened. Patricia Carter continued her solitary crusade for answers, but the passage of time had worn her down physically and emotionally. She had spent her life savings on private investigators, legal fees, and search efforts. Her health had deteriorated from years of stress, sleepless nights, and the constant anguish of not knowing her son's fate. Friends and family members, while supportive, began suggesting that she needed to find a way to move forward with her life. But Patricia refused to give up. She had developed a network of other parents whose children had gone missing, and together they shared information, resources, and emotional support. Through this network, she learned about cases with disturbing similarities to Jamal's disappearance. Students who had vanished from schools in other cities, investigations that had been mishandled or abandoned, and patterns of institutional cover-ups that protected employees and administrators at the expense of missing children. In late 2005, Patricia made a decision that would change the trajectory of her son's case. She used her remaining savings to hire a retired FBI profiler named Dr. Sarah Mitchell, who specialized in institutional crimes and missing person cases involving minors. Dr. Mitchell's preliminary review of the case file identified several investigative leads that had never been properly pursued and recommended a complete re-examination of all physical evidence using updated forensic techniques. Dr. Mitchell was particularly interested in the timeline discrepancies surrounding Bobby Thompson's whereabouts on the day of Jamal's disappearance. She noted that Thompson's changing stories about his location and activities during the crucial sixth period were classic indicators of deception. More significantly, she identified patterns in Thompson's behavior and background that were consistent with individuals who pose risks to children in institutional settings. The profiler's report also criticized the Baltimore Police Department's initial investigation for failing to properly secure and process the crime scene. Key areas of the school, including storage rooms and utility spaces that Thompson had access to, were never thoroughly searched or examined for forensic evidence. The delay in treating Jamal's disappearance as a potential abduction rather than a runaway case had allowed crucial evidence to be lost or contaminated. As 2005 drew to a close, Dr. Mitchell prepared to present her findings to Detective Williams and request that the case be officially reopened with a focus on Bobby Thompson as a person of interest. However, when she attempted to locate Thompson for questioning, she discovered that he had left his job at Benjamin Franklin High School in June 2005, just weeks after Patricia Carter had hired the profiler to review the case. Thompson had given 2 weeks' notice, citing family health issues, and had moved out of his Baltimore apartment without leaving a forwarding address. His departure, coming 4 years after Jamal's disappearance and coinciding with renewed scrutiny of the case, raised troubling questions about what he might have been hiding and whether the window to find answers was closing forever. The abrupt departure of Bobby Thompson from Benjamin Franklin High School in June 2005 sent shockwaves through the renewed investigation into Jamal Carter's disappearance. Detective Williams, now working closely with FBI profiler Dr. Sarah Mitchell, obtained warrants to search Thompson's abandoned apartment and began an intensive effort to track down the former janitor who had suddenly vanished just as investigators were preparing to question him more thoroughly. Thompson's apartment told a disturbing story. The sparse, meticulously clean rooms contained very few personal belongings, suggesting either a hastily planned departure or a man who lived with constant readiness to disappear. However, investigators did find several items of significant interest hidden in a false bottom of a bedroom dresser drawer. These included newspaper clippings about Jamal's disappearance, printed emails from parents and community members discussing the case, and most chillingly, a collection of school photographs and yearbooks dating back to Thompson's first employment with the Baltimore School District in 1995. The photographs revealed an obsessive pattern of behavior that had gone unnoticed for years. Thompson had systematically collected images of students, particularly African-American boys, between the ages of 14 and 16, from every school where he had worked. Some photographs appeared to have been taken without the subject's knowledge, using telephoto lenses during school events or from hidden vantage points on campus. Others were official school photos that Thompson should never have had access to or reason to keep. Dr. Mitchell's analysis of these materials confirmed her worst fears about Thompson's psychological profile. This level of organization and documentation indicates a predatory individual who had been planning and potentially acting on inappropriate impulses for an extended period, she explained to Patricia Carter during a tense meeting at the Baltimore Police Department. The fact that these materials were hidden but not destroyed suggests he intended to return to them, which makes his sudden departure even more significant. The investigation into Thompson's background revealed a pattern of deception and institutional failures that had enabled a potentially dangerous individual to work unsupervised around children for over a decade. His employment application to the Baltimore School District contained false information about his previous work history and personal references. Background checks that should have revealed these discrepancies were either not conducted properly or were ignored by hiring officials eager to fill custodial positions. More disturbing was the discovery that Thompson had been questioned by police in connection with 3 other missing person cases involving teenagers in Maryland and Pennsylvania between 1998 and 2003. In each case, Thompson had been working at schools or youth facilities in the general area when the disappearances occurred. However, he was never seriously considered as a suspect, and the investigations never uncovered the photographic evidence that might have established clear connections between the cases. The multi-state search for Thompson initially proved frustrating. He had paid for his apartment lease and utilities in cash, maintained no credit cards or bank accounts in his name, and had no known family members or close associates who might provide information about his whereabouts. His social security number had not been used for employment purposes since he left the school district. For all practical purposes, Bobby Thompson had vanished as completely as Jamal Carter had 4 years earlier. However, Dr. Mitchell's experience with fugitive psychology provided crucial insights into Thompson's likely behavior patterns. She predicted that he would attempt to continue working around children, possibly using a false identity, and would gravitate toward environments where his custodial skills would make him valuable and less likely to face intensive scrutiny. She also believed that his obsessive personality would compel him to maintain some connection to his previous life, possibly through internet monitoring of news coverage about the cases he was fleeing. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Marcus Carter, Jamal's older brother who had deferred college to search for his sibling, had spent years monitoring online forums and social media platforms for any mention of his brother's case. In September 2005, he noticed that someone with an IP address traced to rural Virginia had been repeatedly accessing articles about Jamal's disappearance and other missing person cases from the Baltimore area. Working with FBI cybercrime specialists, investigators tracked the digital breadcrumbs to a small town near the West Virginia border, where a man named Robert Thomas had been hired as a maintenance worker at a middle school in August 2005. The physical description provided by school officials matched Bobby Thompson exactly, and when investigators obtained surveillance footage from the school's hiring process, they confirmed that Robert Thomas and Bobby Thompson were the same person. The arrest of Thompson on October 15, 2005, marked the first major breakthrough in Jamal Carter's case since his disappearance 4 years earlier. However, Thompson's capture raised as many questions as it answered. He was found living in an isolated cabin with no electricity or running water, surrounded by maps of the eastern United States, marked with locations of schools and youth facilities. His crude living conditions suggested a man who had been planning to remain hidden for an extended period. When initially questioned, Thompson denied any involvement in Jamal's disappearance and claimed that his sudden departure from Baltimore was motivated by harassment from community members who unjustly suspected him of involvement in the case. He explained his collection of student photographs as innocent mementos of his years working in schools, and insisted that his use of a false identity in Virginia was simply an attempt to start fresh after being wrongly accused. However, Thompson's story began to unravel under intensive interrogation. Dr. Mitchell, observing from behind one-way glass, noted signs of deception in Thompson's body language and speech patterns. His detailed knowledge of school security procedures, student schedules, and building layouts from multiple institutions suggested a level of planning and surveillance that went far beyond normal job responsibilities. The most damning evidence came from forensic analysis of items recovered from Thompson's cabin. Among his possessions, investigators found a key ring containing keys that didn't match any of his known residences or workplaces. When these keys were tested at Benjamin Franklin High School, several opened doors to storage areas, utility rooms, and maintenance spaces that had never been properly searched during the original investigation into Jamal's disappearance. If this case has already gripped you, hit the like button. it helps Jamal Carter's story reach more people. The interrogation of Bobby Thompson stretched across 3 grueling days in October 2005, conducted by Detective Williams with assistance from FBI specialists trained in extracting confessions from suspects in child endangerment cases. Thompson's demeanor shifted between defiant denial and nervous evasiveness, but he maintained his innocence regarding any involvement in Jamal Carter's disappearance. However, investigators were building a circumstantial case that painted an increasingly disturbing picture of the man who had worked unsupervised in schools for over a decade. Forensic examination of the keys found in Thompson's possession revealed microscopic traces of concrete dust and paint chips that matched materials used in Benjamin Franklin High School's basement renovation project from 2000-2001. This placed Thompson in areas of the building that were officially off-limits to custodial staff and suggested he had been accessing restricted spaces without authorization. More significantly, these basement areas included a network of utility tunnels and storage rooms that connected to the building's main infrastructure and could provide hidden routes throughout the facility. Dr. Sarah Mitchell's psychological evaluation of Thompson identified classic patterns associated with institutional predators who use positions of trust and access to identify and isolate victims. Thompson's work history showed a preference for schools with large populations of economically disadvantaged students, inadequate supervision policies, and aging physical plants that provided multiple opportunities for unsupervised access to children. His systematic collection of student photographs demonstrated the methodical approach typical of individuals who spend considerable time selecting and surveilling potential targets. The investigation expanded to include a comprehensive review of missing person cases from all the schools and youth facilities where Thompson had worked during his career. This process revealed a disturbing pattern that had never been identified because the cases spanned multiple jurisdictions and time periods. Between 1995 and 2005, 7 students had gone missing from institutions where Thompson was employed, including Jamal Carter. While some of these disappearances were eventually resolved, runaways who returned home or were located elsewhere, 3 remained unsolved cold cases with circumstances similar to Jamal's. Patricia Carter participated in the investigation process with a mixture of hope and dread. After 4 years of unanswered questions, the possibility that Thompson might finally provide information about her son's fate was almost overwhelming. She attended every court proceeding, studied police reports late into the night, and maintained contact with families of other missing children who might be connected to Thompson's activities. The emotional toll was severe, but Patricia felt closer to finding Jamal than she had since the day he disappeared. The breakthrough came during Thompson's 3rd day of interrogation, when Detective Williams employed a strategic revelation of evidence designed to shock Thompson into confession. Williams presented Thompson with enlarged photographs from his hidden collection, arranged in chronological order, demonstrating the systematic nature of his surveillance activities. When Thompson saw images of Jamal Carter mixed with photos of other missing students, his carefully maintained composure finally cracked. "I never hurt anyone," Thompson said, his voice barely audible. I just wanted to help them. Some of these kids, they had problems at home, problems at school. They needed someone who understood, someone who cared about what happened to them." This statement marked the first time Thompson had acknowledged any special interest in the students whose photographs he had collected. Dr. Mitchell, monitoring the interrogation, recognized this as a classic deflection technique used by predators who rationalize their crimes as beneficial to their victims. Thompson's language suggested he viewed himself as a savior figure rather than a threat, which was consistent with psychological profiles of individuals who commit crimes against children while maintaining elaborate justifications for their behavior. Williams pressed Thompson about specific students, beginning with cases that had been resolved and gradually working toward the unsolved disappearances. Thompson admitted to having conversations with several students who were experiencing difficulties, claiming these interactions were intended to provide support and guidance. However, he became increasingly agitated when questioned about students who had gone missing, insisting that he had no knowledge of their whereabouts and suggesting that their disappearances were unrelated coincidences. The interrogation strategy shifted when Williams introduced evidence about Thompson's access to the Benjamin Franklin High School basement and utility areas. Confronted with the concrete dust and paint chip evidence, Thompson could no longer deny that he had been in restricted areas of the building. His explanation, that he was conducting unauthorized maintenance and cleaning work to help the school, was implausible and contradicted by his supervisor's testimony about his assigned duties and work areas. Jamal Carter was last seen in Mrs. Rodriguez's chemistry classroom on October 16, 2001, Williams stated firmly. "We know you were in the building that day. We know you had access to areas where students weren't supposed to be. We know you kept his photograph in your personal collection. What happened to Jamal?" Thompson's response was a turning point in the investigation. Instead of continued denial, he asked for a lawyer and requested to speak privately with Dr. Mitchell. This sudden shift suggested that Thompson was preparing to negotiate some form of confession or plea agreement, but only on his own terms and with guarantees about how his statements would be used in court. The legal maneuvering that followed Thompson's request for counsel created a frustrating delay for the Carter family and investigators who were desperate for answers. Thompson's appointed attorney, recognizing the weakness of his client's position, began exploring plea bargain options that might provide information about missing children in exchange for reduced charges or alternative sentencing arrangements. These negotiations required coordination between federal and state prosecutors across multiple jurisdictions where Thompson's activities had occurred. Meanwhile, search teams began systematically examining every area of Benjamin Franklin High School that Thompson had accessed during his employment. Ground-penetrating radar was used to scan basement floors and utility areas for signs of disturbance. Walls were examined for signs of recent construction or repair work. The school's heating and ventilation systems, water treatment facilities, and electrical infrastructure were thoroughly inspected for any evidence that might reveal what had happened to Jamal Carter. As winter approached in 2005, the investigation had reached a critical juncture. Thompson was in custody, but his confession remained incomplete and conditional. The physical evidence suggested he had knowledge of Jamal's disappearance, but proving legal culpability would require either direct confession or the discovery of physical evidence linking him to the crime. For Patricia Carter and her family, the agonizing wait continued, but for the first time in 4 years, they had reason to believe that the truth about Jamal's fate might finally emerge. If this case has already gripped you, hit the like button. It helps Jamal Carter's story reach more people. The legal negotiations surrounding Bobby Thompson's potential confession created an agonizing period of uncertainty for the Carter family throughout the winter of 2005-2006. Thompson's attorney, Michael Davidson, a public defender with extensive experience in plea bargain arrangements, understood that his client possessed information that multiple law enforcement agencies desperately wanted. However, Thompson's psychological state had deteriorated significantly since his arrest, alternating between periods of lucid cooperation and episodes of paranoid withdrawal that complicated the negotiation process. Dr. Sarah Mitchell conducted extensive psychological evaluations of Thompson during this period, attempting to understand the motivations and thought processes that had driven his decade-long pattern of predatory behavior. Her sessions with Thompson revealed a deeply disturbed individual who had constructed elaborate justifications for his actions while maintaining detailed records of his interactions with students across multiple schools. Thompson's journals, recovered from his Virginia cabin, contained entries that documented his observations of student behavior, family situations, and perceived vulnerabilities in language that was both clinical and disturbing. Thompson displays classic characteristics of an organized predator who uses institutional access and perceived authority to identify and manipulate victims, Dr. Mitchell explained to Patricia Carter during a difficult meeting in February 2006. His journals indicate that he spent considerable time studying individual students, learning about their personal circumstances and planning approaches that would exploit their emotional needs or family problems. This level of premeditation makes his crimes particularly serious from both legal and psychological perspectives. The investigation expanded beyond Thompson's direct involvement to examine systemic failures that had enabled his activities to continue undetected for years. Internal reviews of the Baltimore School District's hiring and supervision practices revealed troubling gaps in background check procedures, inadequate training for recognizing signs of inappropriate employee behavior, and a culture of administrative indifference to reports of boundary violations. These findings supported Patricia Carter's long-standing belief that institutional negligence had contributed to her son's disappearance. Meanwhile, search efforts at Benjamin Franklin High School continued with increasing intensity and technological sophistication. FBI forensic teams using advanced ground-penetrating radar and thermal imaging equipment conducted comprehensive surveys of the building's basement, sub-basement, and utility areas. These searches focused particularly on locations that Thompson's keys could access and areas where his journals indicated he had spent unauthorized time during school hours. The breakthrough came in March 2006, when forensic specialists detected anomalies in the building's original architectural plans. Comparison of current building layouts with construction documents from the 1970s revealed that several basement storage areas had been modified or sealed during renovation projects in the 1990s. These modifications created hidden spaces within the building's infrastructure that could potentially conceal evidence or even human remains. Detective Williams obtained court orders to conduct invasive searches of these concealed areas, a process that required partial demolition of walls and floors in the school's basement. The work was conducted during spring break to minimize disruption to students and staff, but the presence of FBI forensic teams, heavy construction equipment, and news media crews created a circus atmosphere that brought unwanted attention to the already traumatized school community. On March 15, 2006, 4.5 years after Jamal Carter's disappearance, investigators made a discovery that would forever change the trajectory of the case. Behind a false wall in a utility room that Thompson's keys could access, they found personal items that had belonged to Jamal: his class ring, a Baltimore Ravens keychain, and the digital watch his mother had given him for his 15th birthday. The items were carefully preserved in a plastic container, suggesting they had been deliberately hidden rather than accidentally lost. The discovery of Jamal's belongings provided the physical evidence needed to directly connect Thompson to the disappearance, but it also raised new questions about what had happened to the missing teenager. The items appeared to have been stored as trophies or mementos, consistent with the behavior patterns Dr. Mitchell had identified in Thompson's psychological profile. However, the absence of Jamal's remains suggested that his body had been disposed of elsewhere, requiring investigators to expand their search beyond the school grounds. Patricia Carter's reaction to the discovery was a complex mixture of relief and renewed anguish. After years of uncertainty, she finally had confirmation that someone had deliberately harmed her son, validating her instinctive belief that Jamal had not simply run away. However, the realization that Thompson had kept Jamal's possessions as trophies was deeply disturbing, and the continued absence of her son's body meant that fundamental questions about his fate remained unanswered. Thompson's response to the discovery of Jamal's belongings marked another turning point in his cooperation with investigators. Confronted with irrefutable physical evidence linking him to the crime, Thompson could no longer maintain his innocence. However, his confession came in fragments, delivered through his attorney in carefully worded statements designed to minimize his legal exposure while providing enough information to satisfy prosecutors' demands for cooperation. My client acknowledges that he had inappropriate contact with Jamal Carter on the day in question, Attorney Davidson stated during a court proceeding in April 2006. He expresses deep remorse for his actions and is prepared to provide information that will assist law enforcement in resolving this case. However, he maintains that Jamal's death was accidental and occurred during a struggle when the boy attempted to leave a counseling session that my client had initiated. This partial confession raised more questions than it answered. Thompson's claim that Jamal's death was accidental was contradicted by evidence of premeditation, including the systematic collection of student photographs and the deliberate concealment of Jamal's belongings. His description of the incident as a counseling session was consistent with the rationalization patterns Dr. Mitchell had identified, but it provided no details about what had actually occurred or where Jamal's body had been disposed of. The legal proceedings became increasingly complex as prosecutors in multiple jurisdictions sought to charge Thompson with crimes related to the other missing students whose cases had been linked to his activities. Federal charges were also being prepared based on evidence that Thompson had transported materials across state lines and had used his employment in federally funded educational institutions to commit crimes. These multiple legal proceedings created opportunities for Thompson to negotiate more favorable plea arrangements in exchange for complete cooperation. But they also extended the timeline for resolution of individual cases. For the Carter family, the spring of 2006 represented both progress and continued frustration. They finally had answers about who was responsible for Jamal's disappearance, but the fundamental question of where their son's body could be found remained unresolved. Patricia Carter found herself in the difficult position of needing Thompson's cooperation to locate Jamal's remains, while simultaneously wanting to see him receive the maximum possible punishment for his crimes. The media attention surrounding Thompson's partial confession and the ongoing search for Jamal's body brought national focus to issues of school safety, background check procedures, and institutional accountability. Patricia Carter became an advocate for legislative changes that would strengthen requirements for employee screening in educational settings and improve protocols for reporting and investigating suspicious behavior by school personnel. The summer of 2006 brought intense pressure on Bobby Thompson to provide complete information about Jamal Carter's fate and the locations of other potential victims. Federal prosecutors had assembled compelling evidence linking Thompson to multiple crimes across several states, creating legal leverage that his attorney recognized could result in life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The only path to avoid the most severe sentencing required Thompson's full cooperation with ongoing investigations. Dr. Sarah Mitchell continued her psychological sessions with Thompson, employing specialized techniques designed to break through his defensive rationalizations and extract accurate information about his crimes. Thompson's mental state had become increasingly fragile during months of incarceration, and his carefully constructed justifications for his actions began to crumble under sustained professional pressure. The process was methodical and often frustrating, as Thompson would provide partial information and then retreat into silence when pressed for crucial details. Detective Williams coordinated search efforts based on fragmentary information Thompson provided through his attorney. These searches focused on rural areas within a 50-mile radius of Baltimore, where Thompson was known to have spent time during weekends and school breaks. The process required significant resources from multiple law enforcement agencies and created logistical challenges in coordinating searches across different jurisdictions and property ownership boundaries. The breakthrough came during a psychological session in August 2006, when Dr. Mitchell confronted Thompson with evidence from his journals that contradicted his claims about Jamal's death being accidental. Thompson's detailed records included planning notes about specific students, including observations about their schedules, family situations, and behavioral patterns. The level of premeditation documented in these materials made it impossible for Thompson to maintain that his actions were spontaneous or well-intentioned. "You wrote about Jamal for weeks before his disappearance," Dr. Mitchell stated during the session. "You documented his route to chemistry class, noted that he stayed after school for tutoring, and recorded details about his family situation. This wasn't a counseling session that went wrong. This was a planned abduction." Faced with this evidence, Thompson's psychological defenses finally collapsed completely. His confession, delivered through tears and barely audible whispers, revealed the horrifying truth about what had happened to Jamal Carter on that October afternoon in 2001. Thompson had used his master keys to access the chemistry classroom during the 20-minute window when Mrs. Rodriguez was writing on the blackboard with her back to the class. He had approached Jamal and claimed there was an emergency phone call from his mother in the main office. Jamal, trusting the adult authority figure he recognized as the school janitor, had followed Thompson out of the classroom and into the building's basement utility areas. Once isolated from potential witnesses, Thompson had attempted to sexually assault the teenager. When Jamal fought back and threatened to report the attack, Thompson strangled him with the electrical cord from the utility room. The entire incident, from classroom to murder, had taken less than 45 minutes. Thompson's confession provided the missing pieces of the timeline that had puzzled investigators for 5 years. Jamal's body had been concealed in the school's basement until after the initial police search ended, then transported in Thompson's personal vehicle to a wooded area near Patapsco Valley State Park. Thompson had buried Jamal's remains in a shallow grave marked with a distinctive rock formation that he could relocate when necessary. The recovery of Jamal Carter's remains on August 23, 2006, marked the end of 5 years of uncertainty for his family and provided the physical evidence needed to ensure Thompson's conviction on murder charges. However, the discovery also revealed additional horrors that Thompson had not previously admitted. Forensic examination of the burial site uncovered remains of 2 other victims, both teenagers who had gone missing from schools where Thompson had worked in previous years. Patricia Carter's presence at the burial site during the recovery operation was emotionally devastating, but psychologically necessary for her healing process. After years of imagining endless possibilities about her son's fate, she finally had definitive answers about what had happened to Jamal. The knowledge was horrific, but it was also liberating in a way that allowed her to begin grieving properly and moving forward with her life. The legal proceedings that followed Thompson's complete confession moved swiftly through the court system. Thompson pled guilty to 3 counts of first-degree murder, multiple counts of sexual assault, and federal charges related to his crimes across state lines. He was sentenced to 3 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole, ensuring that he would never again pose a threat to children. The resolution of Jamal Carter's case prompted comprehensive reviews of school safety procedures throughout Maryland and other states. Patricia Carter became a leading advocate for legislative changes requiring enhanced background checks for school employees, improved training for recognizing predatory behavior, and stronger protocols for reporting and investigating suspicious incidents involving students and staff members. Benjamin Franklin High School underwent major renovations during the summer of 2007, including the complete reconstruction of basement and utility areas where Thompson had operated. A memorial garden was established in Jamal's honor, featuring a scholarship program for students pursuing engineering studies, fulfilling the dreams that Jamal never had the opportunity to achieve. The broader investigation into Thompson's activities ultimately identified 7 victims across 4 states, making him one of the most prolific institutional predators in modern American criminal history. His case became a subject of study for law enforcement agencies, educational institutions, and child safety organizations seeking to prevent similar crimes in the future. For the Carter family, Thompson's conviction and life sentences provided a sense of justice, but the healing process continued long after the legal proceedings concluded. Keisha Carter, now a senior in high school, had struggled with depression and anxiety throughout her teenage years, but found strength in her mother's advocacy work and her brother's memory. Marcus Carter eventually returned to college and pursued a career in criminal justice, inspired by his family's experience with the failures and successes of the investigative process. Patricia Carter's transformation from grieving mother to public advocate represented one of the few positive outcomes of an otherwise tragic case. Her work with other families of missing children, her testimony before legislative committees, and her collaboration with law enforcement agencies helped ensure that Jamal's death contributed to preventing similar tragedies in the future. The conviction of Bobby Thompson in October 2006 marked a legal victory, but for Patricia Carter and her family, the aftermath of 5 years of uncertainty and trauma required a different kind of healing that couldn't be achieved through courtroom proceedings alone. The revelation that Jamal had been murdered by someone he trusted within the walls of the school where he should have been safe shattered fundamental assumptions about institutional safety and community protection that would take years to rebuild. The psychological impact on the Carter family extended far beyond the immediate grief of loss. Keisha Carter, now 17 and preparing for her senior year of high school, had spent her formative teenage years living in the shadow of her brother's disappearance. The uncertainty about Jamal's fate had created a persistent anxiety that affected her ability to form relationships, trust authority figures, and envision a future beyond the trauma that had defined her family's existence. Learning the truth about how Jamal died provided closure, but it also introduced new sources of anguish about the suffering he had endured. Marcus Carter's decision to defer college and dedicate himself to searching for his brother had cost him academic and career opportunities that couldn't be recovered. At 23, he was finally ready to pursue his education, but the intervening years of investigation and advocacy had changed his goals and interests. He enrolled in criminal justice programs with a focus on missing person cases and victim advocacy, transforming his personal experience of loss into professional dedication to preventing similar tragedies. Patricia Carter's evolution from desperate mother to public advocate represented both personal growth and a practical necessity for processing her grief. Her testimony before Maryland state legislative committees resulted in the passage of Jamal's Law in 2007, requiring enhanced background checks for all school employees and establishing standardized protocols for reporting and investigating inappropriate behavior by educational personnel. Similar legislation was introduced in other states, creating a lasting legal legacy from her son's tragedy. The impact on Benjamin Franklin High School extended beyond physical renovations and procedural changes to fundamental questions about institutional culture and community trust. Many parents transferred their children to other schools. Enrollment declined significantly, and the teaching staff experienced high turnover as educators sought positions in environments less haunted by tragedy. Principal Robert Harrison, who had led the school during Jamal's disappearance and the subsequent investigation, took early retirement in 2007, acknowledging that his leadership had been permanently compromised by the institutional failures that enabled Thompson's crimes. The school district implemented comprehensive reforms designed to prevent similar incidents, but these changes came at considerable financial and administrative cost. The liability lawsuits filed by the Carter family and other victims' families resulted in multi-million-dollar settlements that strained the district's budget and required cuts to educational programs. The legal proceedings also exposed systemic problems in hiring practices, supervision protocols, and crisis response procedures that extended beyond individual schools to district-wide policies and state educational standards. Detective Williams, now promoted to lieutenant, became a nationally recognized expert on institutional predator cases and consulted with law enforcement agencies across the country on similar investigations. His experience with the Thompson case informed development of new investigative protocols for missing person cases involving schools and other youth-serving institutions. However, Williams also acknowledged that the 5-year delay in solving Jamal's case represented investigative failures that might have been avoided with better initial procedures and more aggressive pursuit of early leads. The psychological evaluation of Thompson, conducted by Dr. Sarah Mitchell, became a landmark study in criminal psychology and was used in training programs for law enforcement officers, school administrators, and mental health professionals. Thompson's case demonstrated how institutional predators exploit their positions of trust and access to identify and isolate victims over extended periods. The detailed documentation Thompson maintained of his surveillance activities provided unprecedented insight into the planning and methodical approaches used by such criminals. The broader community impact of Jamal Carter's case extended to national discussions about child safety in educational settings and the adequacy of existing protection systems. Congressional hearings examined federal funding requirements for school safety programs, background check standards for employees in federally supported educational institutions, and coordination between law enforcement agencies in multi-jurisdictional cases involving crimes against children. Media coverage of Thompson's conviction and the details revealed about his decade-long pattern of predatory behavior sparked public outrage and demands for accountability from educational institutions nationwide. Investigative journalists uncovered similar cases in other school districts where warning signs had been ignored, background checks had been inadequate, and administrative responses to complaints had been insufficient. These revelations contributed to a national conversation about systemic reforms needed to protect children in institutional settings. The financial cost of the investigation and prosecution exceeded $2 million in combined federal, state, and local resources, not including the civil litigation expenses and settlement payments that followed. While these costs were significant, they represented a necessary investment in justice for victims and prevention of future crimes. The case also demonstrated the importance of adequate funding for law enforcement agencies investigating complex cases that require extended resources and specialized expertise. For the families of Thompson's other victims, Jamal Carter's case provided both answers about their own losses and validation of their persistent demands for justice. The discovery of remains at the Patapsco Valley burial site identified 2 other teenagers whose disappearances had been inadequately investigated by local authorities. These families had endured years of uncertainty similar to the Carter family's experience, and Thompson's conviction provided closure for multiple communities that had been affected by his crimes. The establishment of the Jamal Carter Foundation in 2008 created a permanent institutional legacy dedicated to preventing crimes against children in educational settings. The foundation provides training resources for school personnel, supports families of missing children, and advocates for legislative reforms to strengthen child protection systems. Patricia Carter's leadership of this organization transformed her personal tragedy into a vehicle for systemic change that continues to protect children nationwide. 10 years after Bobby Thompson's conviction, the impact of Jamal Carter's case continues to resonate through educational institutions, law enforcement agencies, and child protection systems across the United States. The legislative reforms, policy changes, and cultural shifts that emerged from his tragic death have created lasting improvements in school safety that have prevented countless similar crimes and protected thousands of children from predatory individuals who might otherwise have exploited systemic vulnerabilities. The Jamal Carter Foundation, now celebrating its 7th year of operation, has become a leading national organization focused on institutional child protection. Under Patricia Carter's leadership, the foundation has trained over 10,000 school employees in recognizing and reporting suspicious behavior, provided support services to 300 families of missing children, and successfully advocated for legislative reforms in 28 states. The Foundation's annual report demonstrates measurable impacts in reducing institutional crimes against children and improving outcomes for families facing similar tragedies. Marcus Carter completed his master's degree in criminal justice in 2010 and joined the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit, where he specializes in cases involving missing children and institutional predators. His personal experience with his brother's case provides unique insights that inform federal investigations and training programs for law enforcement officers nationwide. Marcus frequently speaks at conferences and training seminars, sharing lessons learned from the Thompson investigation and advocating for improved procedures in missing person cases. Keisha Carter graduated from high school in 2007 and initially struggled with college adjustment and career decisions, but eventually found her calling in social work and trauma counseling. She completed her master's degree in clinical social work in 2014 and now provides therapeutic services to children and families affected by violence and loss. Her personal experience with trauma and recovery informs her professional practice and enables her to connect with clients facing similar challenges. Benjamin Franklin High School underwent comprehensive renovations and restructuring that transformed both its physical environment and institutional culture. The Memorial Garden, established in Jamal's honor, has become a place of reflection and remembrance for the school community, while the scholarship program bearing his name has supported 45 students in pursuing engineering and science education. Current students and faculty report a positive school climate focused on safety, academic achievement, and community support. Detective Williams, now retired from the Baltimore Police Department, serves as a consultant for cold case investigations and missing person cases involving institutional settings. His expertise developed through the Thompson case has contributed to solving dozens of similar crimes across the country. Williams frequently collaborates with the Jamal Carter Foundation on training programs and speaks publicly about the importance of persistent investigation and family advocacy in achieving justice for victims. Dr. Sarah Mitchell's psychological evaluation of Thompson has become a foundational text in criminal psychology curricula and is required reading for law enforcement professionals specializing in crimes against children. Her continued research on institutional predators has contributed to improved screening procedures for educational employees and better understanding of how such criminals operate within trusted institutions. Dr. Mitchell serves on the Scientific Advisory Board of the Jamal Carter Foundation and continues to consult on complex criminal cases. The legal precedents established through Thompson's prosecution have strengthened the ability of law enforcement agencies to investigate institutional crimes and hold both individual perpetrators and negligent institutions accountable for failures to protect children. Civil litigation resulting from the case created financial incentives for educational institutions to implement stronger safety measures and respond more effectively to reports of inappropriate behavior by employees. National statistics on missing children cases show measurable improvements in resolution rates and investigative procedures since the reforms prompted by Jamal Carter's case and similar tragedies. Enhanced background check requirements, improved training for school personnel, and better coordination between educational institutions and law enforcement agencies have contributed to faster identification of potential threats and more effective responses to incidents involving student safety. The cultural impact of Jamal's story extends beyond policy changes to broader societal awareness of child protection issues and the importance of believing and supporting families who report concerns about institutional safety. Media coverage of the case helped break down stigmas associated with discussing crimes against children and encourage community members to take active roles in protecting vulnerable young people. Patricia Carter's transformation from grieving mother to national advocate demonstrates the potential for personal tragedy to create positive social change when channeled through persistent effort and community support. Her testimony before congressional committees, collaboration with law enforcement agencies, and leadership of victim advocacy organizations has influenced federal policy and inspired similar advocacy efforts by other families affected by crimes against children. The annual Jamal Carter Memorial Conference, hosted by the Foundation since 2009, brings together law enforcement professionals, educational leaders, mental health experts, and family advocates to share research findings, discuss best practices, and coordinate efforts to prevent institutional crimes against children. The conference has become a premier professional development opportunity for individuals working in child protection and has facilitated collaboration on cases and initiatives across organizational and jurisdictional boundaries. Thompson remains incarcerated at a maximum security federal facility, serving 3 consecutive life sentences without possibility of parole. His case continues to be studied by criminal psychologists and law enforcement professionals seeking to understand the motivations and methods of institutional predators. While he has provided information about his crimes that helped solve other cases, Thompson has never expressed genuine remorse for his actions or demonstrated meaningful rehabilitation. The Baltimore community has worked to heal from the trauma of Thompson's crimes while maintaining vigilance about institutional safety and child protection. Community organizations established in response to Jamal's case continue to provide support services for families and advocacy for policy reforms. The annual memorial service held in Jamal's honor draws hundreds of participants and serves as a reminder of both the tragedy of his death and the positive changes that emerged from his family's pursuit of justice. Educational institutions nationwide have implemented the safety protocols and training programs developed in response to Jamal Carter's case, creating a lasting protective legacy that honors his memory through practical measures to safeguard other children. While no system can provide absolute protection against all threats, the reforms inspired by his tragedy have significantly reduced the vulnerabilities that enabled Thompson's crimes and improved the ability of schools to respond effectively to potential dangers. For Patricia Carter, the work of the Foundation provides ongoing purpose and meaning in her life while keeping Jamal's memory alive through tangible efforts to protect other families from experiencing similar losses. While nothing can bring her son back or erase the pain of his death, the knowledge that his story has prevented other tragedies provides comfort and motivation for continued advocacy efforts. The case of Jamal Carter stands as a testament to the power of family persistence, community support, and systemic reform in achieving justice for victims and preventing future crimes. His legacy lives on through the thousands of children who are safer today because of the changes prompted by his tragic death and his mother's unwavering determination to ensure that his life and death would have lasting meaning. 20 years after that October afternoon, when a promising young man walked into chemistry class and never came home, Jamal Carter's name represents hope, justice, and the enduring power of love to create positive change in the face of unimaginable loss. Subscribe to our channel to explore more cold cases and disturbing stories across America. Thank you for following Jamal Carter's story. See you in the next video.